Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Now, a special edition for this Independence Day 2016 holiday. Here's Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Well, thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to a 4th of July edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I just hope I can live up to the billing that Bob gave me in the intro today. Kind of surprised me. I didn't expect that. But I did put a notice on Facebook about an hour before we went on. An hour before we were scheduled to go on the air today, saying that this was a program devoted to the fact that it is the 4th of July. And I've taken the opportunity over the last couple of days to put a few of my thoughts together and do some writing and some organizing and some rethinking and some reflecting on the nature of the holiday and on Jefferson and on the Declaration and all of that. And I trust that that the program will be successful, and it will be one that you will find well worthy of your time here on this wonderful holiday in the middle of the summer in 2016. We would love to hear from you if you have thoughts or ideas, and I'm sure you have reactions about the situation that the nation finds itself in and the world finds itself in the middle of this summer in 2016. We would love to hear from you. We have a phone number that is there primarily to give you an opportunity to be heard. The Head On Radio Network generally, and this program, the Virtual Center on the Constitution specifically, is intended primarily to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts and your ideas with others who have the same kind of interest in what's going on in the world and in this nation that you do. That's really why we're all here. And so this is a vehicle. This is an opportunity to take advantage of some of the latest technology and make your voice heard and give you an opportunity to share your thoughts and your ideas and your concerns and your hopes and your fears, as it were, with others. And as we know, because many of you who are listening have been rather regular followers of the Head On Radio Network for some time, you care. You not only care, but you know, you are informed. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be a listener on the Head On Radio Network. You wouldn't be a devoted follower of this program, the Virtual Center, which unbelievably to me, in one more week, on the 11th of July, will be on the air for 40 months. 3 years and 4 months. That is absolutely incredible. We began our programs here at the Virtual Center on March 11th, 2013. So it's unbelievable to me that we've been around that long. And we continue to be here, and we continue to struggle. You would think in the course of all of that time, we would have found some answers, some ways to make the broadcasts a little bit smoother and a little bit easier and a little bit less stressful financially. But unfortunately, we haven't done that yet. But we continue to look, and we continue to hope. And I know I've talked to, I'm sure all of you have, but I've talked to so many people that have said to me, if I ever hit Powerball, your problems over at the Head On Radio Network are over. Well, of course, I feel the same way, and I know many folks feel that way as well. So with all of us playing Powerball, how long can it be before one of us hits the jackpot, so to speak? Welcome to today's program, the special program on this very special day, the 4th of July in the summer of 2016. Again, we do advise you to, or invite you to participate in our program by sharing your thoughts with other folks. I mentioned the phone number before. Let me give you the number. It is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-HORN, HORN, 4676. 888-866-7676. If you'd like to share your thoughts with me personally, one-on-one, and not go on the air to do that and give me the opportunity to get them on the air for you, I would be more than happy to do that. I would love to hear from you anyway. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN, 906@gmail.com. And finally, I do invite you to avail yourself of our Facebook page. If you are a regular user of Facebook, you know how easy it is. Just go to facebook.com, and when you get to the homepage, look at the top, and there's a search box there. And all you do is type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will have access to our Facebook page. And there are a number of items on there, a number of postings that I've put on the Facebook page in recent weeks. The most recent ones are, of course, the ones you'll come to first. And then as you scroll down, they move back further and further in time. There's going to be one entry on the Facebook page after today's program. I have, as I mentioned, in preparation for today's program, I did do some writing, and I've come up with a document that I have kind of made up my mind that I would put on the Facebook page. I'm a little bit skeptical only because it's a little bit longer than many of the documents I put on there, which I know have been too long. And this one's perhaps a little bit longer. But it's going to be pretty much the basis of our program today. I hope it'll be interesting. I hope you'll find it interesting. I know I did, just in putting it together. It's one of those things that the more I got into it, the more interested in it and enthused about it I got. I continue to do that with many of these sources. I think it makes what we're doing so very, very rewarding for me because it never gets old and it never gets stale. In fact, I think one of the concluding comments on what I did write about today basically addresses just that every time we think we know about all there is to know, we find out that we really don't know much at all. And again, I think that's incredibly important to keep in mind and to understand and to roll with, not to reject, but to roll with. One of our listeners, Jack, sent me a link earlier today for the 4th of July, and it basically was a link to an article that appeared on the 4th of July 2 years ago. And it was an entry, actually an excerpt from a book written by Jill Lepore on the founders on the 4th of July. And a segment of that book was reproduced and published on the 4th of July 2014, 2 years ago. And I looked at it. I had seen it before, very honestly. It had been several months, but I had seen it before. It's a good piece, and I knew it was a good piece. The minute I saw the fact that Jill Lepore's name on it, I knew it was good. Jill Lepore is one of the very best there is. And Jack, in sending me the link, made the comment and said, and this is in no way is this a criticism. I think it's just kind of light, but Jack said, here's an article you might find interesting in celebration of the 4th, but it's 2 years old. It was written in 2014. And of course, given the fact that we're talking about Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence, the fact that something is 2 years old instead of 200 plus years old, it seems to me is not a factor at all. And in fact, sometimes the older it is, the better it seems to be. But be that as it may, this particular piece, which I appreciated from Jack very, very much, is an account in celebration of the 4th of July 2 years ago, an account of the founders, pretty much a celebration of the day, as is my feeling on this 4th of July in the year 2016. The major theme of the section reproduced in this article written by Jill Lepore. The book is taken, the excerpt is taken from Jill Lepore's book, which is entitled The Whites of Their Eyes, The Tea Party's Revolution and the Battle Over American History. And basically, of course, what Jill Lepore is doing, around a couple of years ago, is taking the Tea Party and the Tea Party's claim, just by calling itself the Tea Party, that it's a throwback to the original Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party in 1775, and earlier. Obviously the Tea Party itself was in 1773, I believe. But anyway, what she's pointing out is that while the Tea Party of today claims these historical roots, the fact of the matter is they aren't roots at all. They're quite fallacious. And what the segment that is reproduced in this article basically deals with is the idea of originalism, the interpretation of history with the idea that you need to go back to the original meaning of the words and the original intent of the people who wrote it. And this, of course, was related to the late Justice Antonin Scalia, of course, because he did an awful lot to publicize the theory of the idea of originalism. This particular book by Jill Lepore goes back and points out that while so many people tend to assume that when we talk about the founders, there was one particular position on the issues, and that most of the founders, so-called, agreed on that position, on that particular position, she points out that the reality was quite different. That, in fact, the founders seemed to differ on pretty much everything. And she points out that, and this is a quote from Jill Lepore, beginning even before it was over, the revolution has been put to wildly varying political purposes, she says. Between 1761, when the first signs of discontent against England became apparent in the colonies, and 1791, 30 years later, when the Bill of Rights was ratified, Lepore writes that, quote, Americans debated an ocean of ideas from which you can fish out anything. In other words, the founders were all over the lot and on so many significant issues that you can go back and cherry pick. You can find whatever suits you and pull it out and ultimately focus on it. And of course, and this is what so many people do, take what they cherry pick and try to reimpose it back on the period and apply it to everybody. In other words, try to argue or imply that all the founders at that particular time agreed on this particular position because one person did at one particular point in time. And she points out her book is primarily an argument in opposition to that. The section that is reproduced in this particular article deals, as I mentioned, with the idea of originalism. And her point and her thesis, and I think this statement would be enough to warrant going back and looking this up. Just go to Google and look up Jill Lepore on the 4th of July, 4th of July note to Tea Partiers. And her subtitle, Your Politics Would Baffle the Founding Fathers. And of course, she's talking directly to the Tea Party, to today's Tea Party, and suggesting that any reference to the original Tea Party is, as they say, purely coincidental. Anyway, Jill Lepore's theme in this particular section is that originalism is not historical theory at all. It's not a historical strategy or historical technique at all. It's not even historical. Her point is it's fundamentalism. First and foremost, the idea of originalism is fundamentalism. It's the idea that you go all the way back. You find what people believed at a particular point in time, and then you fast forward that up to the present, and you basically insist that everybody adopt that same perspective, that same point of view on that particular issue. And she points out how historically fallacious that idea is. And in the excerpt that's included here, she goes back to the efforts and the concerns of those fundamentalists who argue that secularists, those who have tried to take God out of our early American history, have pretty well set out to extract or expel Christianity and religion and God from early American history. And of course, they take particular issue with that. She has in this particular section a quote from Jerry Falwell, for example, written in 1987. As you remember, Jerry Falwell was the creator of the so-called moral majority, and he was very active politically in the 1970s and 1980s before he passed away. And of course, one of his major legacies is Liberty University in Virginia, which his son now manages. And it's become a very, very prominent and prestigious and well-attended school. I think with its online enrollment, it has, if I'm not mistaken, the second largest online enrollment of any college or university in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, Jerry Falwell had made the point and said, any diligent student of American history finds that our great nation was founded by godly men upon godly principles to be a Christian nation. And then Jill Lepore goes to Tim LaHaye, who wrote a book called The Faith of Our Founding Fathers, in which he basically argues the same thing in what he calls the rape of history by historical or history revisionists who had systematically erased from American textbooks the evangelical Protestants who founded the nation. And the example that he uses, and that's really the lead for today's program, is Thomas Jefferson. And Jill Lepore points out that Thomas Jefferson, among the founders, probably posed the major challenge of all to Tim LaHaye and to Jerry Falwell and the others. Because, and I think many of us know this, Jefferson customized or created his own Bible. What he did was he took a custom copy of the Bible and he extracted all the miracles and then pasted back together again what was left. And his implication is, if you take out all the miracles and all the things that are not believable and make no sense, you've got a pretty good document. You've got a pretty good piece of writing is basically what Jefferson's implication is. And so these people who seek to bring God back into our nation's history and obviously along with it back into our classrooms have pretty much turned around and done the same thing to Jefferson that these people believe Jefferson did to God. LaHaye, for example, took his own pair of scissors, Jill Lepore says, and argued that Jefferson didn't count as a founding father because he contributed nothing to the founding of our nation. I guess what I'm saying is that here on this 4th of July in the year 2016, I think all of us would have to acknowledge, at a minimum, that Thomas Jefferson contributed something meaningful to the founding of our nation. And of course, it's the document that we celebrate, the Declaration of Independence. And we know, I'm sure, that actually the actual date when the Congress ratified the Declaration of Independence was July 2nd, not July 4th. July 2nd was when the approved or ratified document was made public. But actually, the passage of the Declaration was on July 2nd. And many of you have seen the quote from Abigail Adams to John about how the day, and remember John was there, at the signing, at the approval of the Declaration of Independence. And for those of you, and our friend Horst sent me a reminder today about the movie 1776, the musical 1776. He knows that I've watched it numerous times, as he has. We both agree that it's a delightful historical film. And as I've mentioned before, one of the things that I enjoyed about 1776 is the fact that in some ways, even though it's a musical, and even though it obviously plays fast with historical fact, the fact is that the treatment of many of the historical characters at the writing of the Declaration of Independence is pretty solid. In more cases than not, they have captured pretty accurately the personalities of the individuals portrayed. As I think back, of course, John Adams is to the members of the convention the proverbial pain in the ass. He's the one that he has very few social graces. He's very blunt, very direct. He really ticks people off and in many ways becomes his own worst enemy. And throughout the film, Benjamin Franklin is constantly cautioning John Adams and reassuring him and suggesting to him that he needs to back off. He needs to be a little bit less aggressive, a little bit less pointed, a little bit less insulting, because he needs these people's votes. And if you need these people to come around to your way of thinking, you can't afford to insult them or to irritate them or to drive them away or anything else. John Adams had a very difficult time learning that lesson. And there are stories, and I recommend the book, and I've recommended this book before. It's an old book written by Samuel Flagg Bemis, B-E-M-I-S, on diplomacy of the American Revolution, and specifically, it's on the peace treaty and the negotiations and deliberations that went into the fashioning of the peace treaty in April of 1783, ending the American Revolution and securing the independence of the 13 colonies. And if you read that book, and it's been years since I've read it, and my guess is, I didn't check this out before we came on the air, but my guess is that if you look on Google, you can probably, given the age of this book, you can probably get a copy of this book online if you look. The author is Samuel Flagg Bemis. And the title, I believe, is The Diplomacy of the American Revolution. I think that's the title, Diplomacy of the American Revolution. And in that, Bemis makes a great point about the personality clashes that existed within the American delegation. How Franklin was the one that ingratiated himself with the French. And he was able to get concessions from the French, from Vergennes and the other leaders in France because of his popularity. And the most difficult one to deal with John Adams, because John Adams was continually insulting somebody. And Franklin's position is if he didn't keep his mouth shut, he was going to cost himself the kind of peace treaty that they had a chance to get. And so most people, and Bemis himself, believes that the success of our peace treaty was, as much as anything else, due to the diplomatic skills of Benjamin Franklin. And actually, I think most of the research that has been done since then suggests that the reason we got as much as we did in the peace treaty was, as much as anything else, due in part to the French alliance, obviously, to the role that the French played, but also to the diplomacy of Benjamin Franklin, no question. But But anyway, that's the kind of book you can look at on this particular period. But the point is that Jefferson is the founder who's really most associated with July 4th, 1776, because of the Declaration of Independence. We've done program after program here over the months on the Declaration of Independence. We've looked at the language, we've looked at the origins, we looked at competing interpretations of the Declaration. If you remember, we went through pretty carefully and pretty much in detail the study of the Declaration written and published in 1922 by Carl Becker, which is entitled The Declaration of Independence, which has pretty much been accepted as the definitive view, the definitive study of the Declaration of Independence. And as we'll recall, Carl Becker made the argument that there is absolutely no question that Jefferson's Declaration of Independence is Lockean, stems directly from the philosophy of John Locke in the Second Treatise on Civil Government. Locke's natural rights of life, liberty, or property in Locke's so-called state of nature have seemingly been transposed by Carl Becker and superimposed on Jefferson's Declaration. And Becker writes in 1922 that there is absolutely no question that Jefferson's Declaration is Lockean. And we talked about what that means. And the fact of the matter is, what it means is important. What it means is that Locke's interpretation of natural rights within his state of nature has really become the definitive interpretation of the Declaration of Independence, of Jefferson's intent in the Declaration of Independence. And if we think back on it, we know pretty much what that means. What that means is that according to Locke, life, liberty, and property all reduce to the issue of property. Your life, to Locke, is property granted to you by the Creator. Consequently, the only one that can take life is God, because God gave it to you. And Locke makes a very, very pointed argument against suicide. Even though theoretically your life is your property, Locke points out it really isn't, because it comes from God and only God can take it. But in the traditional sense, then, your life is your property. Your liberty, according to Locke, relates directly to property. Because the purpose of liberty in the state of nature is a guarantee of the freedom to pursue property. And of course, the third natural right that Locke defines is property itself. We spent quite a bit of time here at the Virtual Center on looking at the transition from the state of nature into organized society, pointing out that while property was a natural right within the state of nature, it ceases to be a natural right and becomes a public responsibility once the transition from the state of nature into organized society under government takes place. And the evidence for that we found in Locke himself, because John Locke basically pointed out that even in the state of nature, there had to be some sort of controls, some sort of limitations on access to private property. Because Locke's thinking was that every move made to privatize property, to privatize a segment of the state of nature, reduces the available property for other people. So consequently, in the state of nature itself, Locke says, there has to be a constant monitoring of the process of privatizing the state of nature. And the argument is that the definitive justification, the all-purpose justification for privatizing a state of nature and creating private property is that there needs to be property of equal value left available to others. If there isn't, then that process of privatizing should not happen, because to do it would deny freedom of access to other people, and everybody has liberty as a natural right. So the implication, we spent quite a bit of time on this here at the Virtual Center some months ago. The implication that we can draw is that even Locke himself believed that private property, once it became private property within organized society, carries with it a public responsibility. And we talked about the logic of transferring that public responsibility directly to government with the creation of the so-called social contract, the decision of man to leave the state of nature and enter into organized society and come with his private property to do that. The implication is that in exchange for the protections of government, man must be willing to subject his private property to public responsibility. What that means then is that efforts to take Locke and directly impose it on Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence are faulty. Because Jefferson did not say life, liberty, and property. Jefferson said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the fact of the matter is, Jefferson apparently was talking about something quite different than John Locke was talking about. But whether in fact that's true or not, and I believe it is, the fact of the matter is that in 1922, Carl Becker pretty well put the stamp of acceptance on the fact that Jefferson's Declaration of Independence was totally Lockean. And what that means, of course, is that if it's Lockean, then the decision to replace pursuit of property in Jefferson with property and use Locke as the basis for that makes perfect sense and is legitimate. Because what that does effectively is add property to the list of unalienable rights in Jefferson. If you can successfully replace Jefferson's pursuit of happiness with property, if you can argue successfully that in this society, happiness is the acquisition of wealth, is property, is success. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with replacing pursuit of happiness with property. What makes it wrong is that Jefferson's pursuit of happiness he defines as an unalienable right. If you try to replace it with property, then you are implying that you also have the right to list property as an unalienable right, and that's what many people have chosen to do. and that is invalid. It is historically wrong. But let's be honest. It has been accepted. Carl Becker's interpretation of the Declaration is accepted as definitive, and we basically go on from there. So what we have effectively what we do confront then is the reality of a situation which tells us that the Declaration of Independence we believe we've read, the portions of the Declaration of Independence many of us have memorized as school children, has likely been taken out of context. Its meaning has been changed. And effectively, I believe, that the Declaration of Independence written by Jefferson has effectively been lost in the shuffle. I made it my goal on this 4th of July in the year 2016 to do what I might do to reinsert Jefferson back into the conversation, to write up something which hopefully would be read by enough people that would put Thomas Jefferson back on the table and open up the dialogue, open up the discussion, and suggest that there is not only one official interpretation of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, but rather there is more than one. And one of the ones that needs to be considered is the one by the very person who wrote the Declaration, Thomas Jefferson. With that, then, I'd like to share with you a bit of what I've written in celebration of this 4th of July. In order to do it, I focused on only one sentence of the Declaration, a sentence that appears early in the document in what many people refer to as the Declaration's preamble. Jefferson doesn't call it a preamble. It's merely the beginning of the document. But this brings us to another issue, which I think we might clarify a little bit before we get into the actual piece of writing that I'm talking about here. And that is the preamble. We've done programs here in months past about the nature of the Declaration, as I've mentioned. One of the things we learned is that what we call the preamble received almost no attention in the Continental Congress, which was charged with the debate and ultimate ratification of the Declaration. It was the Congress of the United States that had to accept and adopt this Declaration of the United States in order to declare the independence from Great Britain of the 13 colonies. During that debate, research tells us that almost none of the debate focused on the preamble. Almost all the time and all the revisions that came from the Continental Congress were focused on the body, the main body of the Declaration, which is the extensive list of charges and allegations of misbehavior by King George III and by Parliament. That's where the Continental Congress focused its attention. That's where the debate focused. That's where the many changes imposed upon Jefferson's document were focused. There was almost no discussion of the preamble. So when Jefferson, in the preamble, referred to this statement as a statement of what he called self-evident truths, the fact of the matter is he must have been right. Because if there was no debate, no discussion, and no amendments to the preamble, then one must accept the fact that most of the delegates in the Continental Congress went along with Jefferson and believed that what he was saying was self-evident. It was in the specifics of the document related to what the king had done or what Parliament had done that the debate occurred. By focusing on the preamble, then, we are in effect turning history on its head. We are focusing on a part of the Declaration that the people who ratified it didn't focus on. We're ignoring the part that they did. Why? In past programs, we learned why. Because 100 years after the fact, 100 years after 1776, almost 100 years, Abraham Lincoln resurrected the Declaration of Independence from what many people refer to as the ash heap of history. For the most part, the Declaration of Independence had pretty much disappeared from American conversation. Few people focused upon it. It was celebrated for a while because it marked on July 4th the independence of the nation from Great Britain. But beyond the fact that it was a Declaration of Independence, there was little else to celebrate about it until Abraham Lincoln got hold of it and used it for his purposes in the 1860s to strengthen the Union. And Lincoln saw in the preamble to the Declaration of Independence a potential justification for his argument against the legitimacy and the humanity of slavery. By talking about the fact that all men are created equal. All men are granted unalienable rights by their Creator, etc., etc., etc. And Lincoln's point in the 1860s was to end the institution of slavery in order to live up to the philosophy of the Declaration. Lincoln called the Declaration America's creed. He resurrected the document, but in the process, he made the preamble the featured part of the document, when in effect to the people who wrote it and approved it, it was far from that. So that's part of the background that it seems to me need to consider as well. With that, then, let me share with you a couple of the initial lines that I've written in the celebration of the Declaration on this 4th of July, 2016. On this 4th of July in 2016, I'd like to reflect on the significance of this day some 240 years ago. It's the day the Continental Congress formally released a copy of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, adopted by that same Congress 2 days earlier. More particularly, I'd like to reflect on what is perhaps the most often quoted sentence in the entire Declaration. To most of us, the key sentence in the document. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unquote. That is one sentence from the entire document. But many of us have come to believe that it's the most important sentence in the document because it pretty much defines what Lincoln called America's creed. It defines the mission of the United States of America in the world to many of us. It is the statement of principle, the statement of vision, the statement of ideals that Americans believe makes this nation stand out above among the other nations of the world. It's something that this nation can be proud of. It's become a focus of American nationalism. My point, and the point we've made in the first part of our program today, is that in the process of the 240 years that have gone by since it was approved, it's undergone some unbelievable changes in interpretation. Let me be specific. What makes Jefferson so difficult to deal with, especially looking back from a distance of almost 2.5 centuries, is that he really didn't explain what he meant by what he said. Even though he referenced truths that were self-evident, it's not all that clear what self-evident meant to him or to his colleagues in the Congress. What we do know is that he must have been right about the self-evident part, because Congress spent almost no time debating what is quoted above. Almost all the debate before adoption focused on the main body of the document, the presentation of charges against King George III and his Parliament. So we have to conclude that what most of us see as this key section of the Declaration, the preamble so-called, generated almost no attention, no discord, no debate. Self-evident? Indeed. But insignificant? Hardly. Though maybe it was just so very self-evident that there was little in it to question or discuss. Conclusion, my conclusion, it appears that what Jefferson referred to as self-evident truths turned out to be just that, because what he said elicited almost no reaction from his colleagues. In effect, that meant that they pretty much agreed with what he said. That what he was saying about the foundations of this nation was pretty much accepted. What he was saying about mankind, what he was saying about natural rights, what he was saying about man's rights in relationship to government was pretty generally accepted by those in the Congress. So the fact that there was no debate means that there probably was agreement, and that Jefferson probably was indeed correct in saying that these were self-evident truths. But it's very important to understand exactly what that means. To go on. What makes a complicated story even more complicated is that periodically through the decades ever since then, prominent spokesmen have taken it upon themselves to fill in the blanks for us, as it were, to tell us precisely what Jefferson meant, what Jefferson wasn't all that precise about. Usually, their motive wasn't so much to clarify Jefferson as it was to use him to justify a particular policy, a particular ideology, or an entire agenda important to them at that particular time. Translation. Because Jefferson didn't explain clearly what he meant by what he said, that created an opportunity for those who came after him to assert that they knew what he didn't say. They knew what he meant. So, in effect, Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, his preamble, as it were, is open to interpretation principally because he didn't interpret it. He didn't definitively say what I'm saying in debt, if you will, to John Locke. Or he didn't say what I'm saying is contrary to the writings of John Locke. He didn't say either, which means that he left it up to those who came after him to do that for him. Obviously, there's a lesson here for all of us. It kind of suggests that if what we're about, if what we're doing, of what we choose to say and support and believe is really important to us, we need to be definitive in what we mean by it. Because if we don't, others will do it for us. They will take what we say and what we do, and they will reinterpret it to suit their own particular situation. And if we haven't given a definitive definition of what we mean, then we've effectively given them the opportunity to do that. And we don't want to do that. So I think that this initial few paragraphs really says a lot. The result of all of this, I've said, is that over time, we've lost much of what to Jefferson was indeed self-evident. On this day, July 4th, 2016, this day of celebration of Jefferson's handiwork, it seems appropriate to try to set the record straight, at least in part. And the reason I put at least in part is because we're not going to take on the entire Declaration. We're only taking on one sentence of it. But the sentence we're taking on is probably the clearest example of why we need to do it. Because the sentence we're taking on is the one that received almost no attention when the document was first written. The author of the document called it self-evident. By not responding to that, members of the Congress were in effect agreeing with Jefferson that they agreed with what he was saying. No comment required. But the fact of the matter is, 240 years later, this particular sentence, to many people, is the be-all and end-all of the Declaration of the United States. It's what we ask our kids to memorize in school. It's what our tests are about. The whole idea of unalienable. You notice how we focus on rights in this country? We focus on rights. People have the right to do this. People have the right to do that. Government can't interfere with this. Government can't interfere with that. The implication is what makes this nation a nation is the fact that it respects individual rights. The fact of the matter is, and as the title of this program suggests, the founders believed, always believed, that rights come with responsibilities. And if you are creating, as the founders did, a republic based on mass participation by the people, then this republic requires much more than a celebration of citizen rights. It requires as well an emphasis on the responsibilities of citizenship. And it's that part of the equation that we have pretty much tended to overlook in recent years. Those people are out there pushing for, arguing for a particular political agenda. And that agenda involves minimizing and reducing government's influence and power in our society. Their strategy is to highlight the rights of individuals as a way to highlight their need to reduce the power and influence of government. The assumption is that if you focus on individual rights, you effectively make active, aggressive government less popular. And that's the agenda of contemporary conservatives in America today. And that's the agenda that Jefferson's Declaration, as he wrote it, would refute. It's been repressed. And it's time that it was rediscovered. It's time that it was brought back, put back on the table, and appreciated by all of our people for what it is. It's an incredible statement of a nation's commitment to people. It's an incredible statement of the fact that what makes a human being human is their concern for this fellow man, is the empathy that they feel for each other, is their recognition that individuals without community is no life at all. And that the best thing you can do for fulfilling the dreams and the hopes of individuals is to do everything you can to insist that they live in a community, in a functioning, living community, where people really care about them, and equally, even more important, they have an opportunity to do for others. We're living right now here in southern West Virginia in a horrendous situation created by the weather. A lot of people in this region are in need, desperate need. And West Virginians, as they usually do, are responding. But not just West Virginians. People, volunteers are coming in from all over the place in order to help. There's something wonderful about that. That's what Jefferson was talking about in 1776. We've repressed it. We tend to try to suggest that this is unique. This is not unique. This is what Jefferson believed man was about. This is what life was about. This is what Jefferson in the Declaration believed happiness was about. is the ability to do this for our fellow man. That's what it's about. Not only has Jefferson been repressed, but the ideas that he wrote were repressed as well. And one more thing. Jefferson claimed that those ideas were self-evident. If he was correct, if we've been correct, that the lack of debate and discussion in Congress validates the extent to which Jefferson's claim of self-evidence is indeed valid, then that makes the crime of historical misinterpretation that we have perpetrated even worse. Because we've not just done a disservice to one man, the man who wrote the document, but we've done a disservice to all of those who voted for it, to all of those who agreed with Jefferson that it was self-evident. We literally have turned the intent of the founders on its head for reasons that I think we better start thinking seriously about. With that, I think it's about time that we pause. We're at just beyond the top of the hour. I think we should pause for our regular 5-minute break. Then we'll come back and we're going to continue this special tribute to the day, the 4th of July, and to Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, and to this effort to rediscover the Thomas Jefferson that many in our nation's history have chosen to repress. I think it's well beyond time to do that. You're listening to the Virtual Center. This is Bill O'Brien. 5-minute break. We'll be right back. Thank you. Well, thank you, Bob Kincaid. Really enjoyed listening to that music today. You just texted me that it's Aaron Copland's Rodeo. It's just fabulous. It seems quite appropriate for this particular day. It sounds so festive and so up, and it is indeed a festive day. It's the 4th of July here in America today, and I hope that all of you are enjoying the day. It falls on a Monday, which creates the long weekend for many folks, and I trust that many of you are enjoying that with cookouts and celebrations and fireworks and all. I thought to heaven that all the fireworks in the country had moved into our neighborhood last night. From 9 o'clock last evening until midnight, or there a little bit after, we had the most incredible fireworks display. I didn't watch it, but a few moments of it. Most of it I listened to. As I was trying to go to sleep, I was listening to it. It was intense. Anyway, welcome to today's program. If you are just joining us, welcome. If you've been with us through our first hour, I especially want to thank you for joining us on this, a special day, the 4th of July holiday. And that means that there are many people that can join us on days when on other days they usually can't. But the fact of the matter is, since it's a holiday, it also probably means that there are many people who regularly join us live here at the Virtual Center who, for reasons of their own today, are not with us and will probably pick the program up on podcast. Whichever of those situations fits you, I just want you to know how much we appreciate your continued support, not only for this program, but for the Head On Radio Network generally. Let me once again share with you our phone number and invite you to use it if you have something that you would like to say on this 4th of July afternoon. Our number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me and share your ideas that way, my email address is waobrien906 @gmail.com. W.A. O'Brien, Obrien 906 @gmail.com. And again, I do encourage you to take a look at our Facebook page. And very honestly, after we go off the air today, I do expect to post on our Facebook page the particular piece of writing that I'm basing a good portion of our program on this 4th of July on. For better part of 2 days, I've pretty well spent my time kind of reflecting, trying to reflect on the importance and the nature of the day and what I know about Jefferson, what we've done here in previous programs about Jefferson. I've tried to bring it all together and put it together in a way that will do honor to the day, honor to Jefferson as one of our founders, honors to you, our audience, on this special day, and very honestly, honor as well to the importance of the discipline, to the importance of history, and to the negatives associated with reinterpreting history to serve personal self-interest rather than the public interest. As you know, because I've said it many times, I believe very, very firmly in that, and I trust that today's program is my effort, at least in part, to contribute to that particular sentiment. I wanted to go back and return to where we were when we broke at the top of the first hour here on today's program. We had gone through the background. We had looked at this one particular sentence from Jefferson's preamble, the one that everybody knows. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We talked about historical events and issues which have affected the interpretation of that particular sentence. We talked about the historical circumstances which led Abraham Lincoln to take the preamble, which had barely been addressed at all when the Declaration was debated and approved in 1776, and brought the preamble to the fore and brought this particular sentence to the point where Lincoln himself could refer to it as America's creed. In a sense, then, by highlighting this sentence, we're focusing on that portion of the Declaration that most citizens in this country believe the Declaration is all about. But historical evidence tells us that at the time the Declaration was written and approved, it was hardly worthy of comment, which it seems to me very significant. Because as we go through this and as we look at what this sentence really means and meant to Jefferson, and we take seriously his statement that these are self-evident truths, we have to confront the reality of the fact that what we are doing is restoring the validity of history, that we are creating a circumstance in which people must look at what Jefferson really meant, what the members of the Continental Congress believed was so self-evident about this particular document. And we looked in our first hour at the impact of Carl Becker's study of the Declaration in 1922 as being totally Lockean. And we looked at John Locke. And what we talked about is the extent to which Locke's interpretation has pretty much been superimposed on Jefferson. And the result is that Locke's intent we have made Locke's intent Jefferson's intent. Part of my mission today is to reverse that. So that's where we were. With that kind of background, we basically put all this in context just before we broke at the top of the hour by reminding everyone that today is the 4th of July. And if there was ever a day to do this, this would seem to be the day. So here we go. It seems to me the first thing that we need to address in this particular sentence in Jefferson's preamble is the idea of what Jefferson called self-evident truths. What exactly did Jefferson mean by self-evident truths? This is what I've said. Jefferson surely had what was accepted truth in mind, but likely did not mean truth that was revealed. On the contrary, Jefferson rejected the power of organized belief systems, religions, that would deny the power of man's reason, his ability to seek truth for himself. Self-evident truths to Jefferson, then, were not what religious people believed. They were what educated men accepted as discovered truth, as the product of analysis, as the product of research, as the product of what Jefferson and his colleagues often referred to as scientific evidence. In effect, then, what Jefferson was talking about was not the religious aspect of the Declaration. What he was talking about was what we call the Enlightenment aspect, the aspect of self-evident truths that focused on man's ability to reason and to seek to discover truth for himself, not a definition of truth which is handed down or mandated by any particular organized group or any particular organized denomination or religion. So I think that's the first clarification we need to make, is in the area of what Jefferson meant by self-evident truths. And of course, it's very evident, and I won't go back into this now, but it seems to me very evident that if you pause here for a minute and think about that, that's exactly what we have not done, not taken seriously in the way we have treated the Declaration of Independence since its passage 240 years ago. We have tended to pass down the writings and the philosophy of Locke. We have tended to pass down beliefs about the founders, which have insisted on the part of many people that the document, that the founders were Christian, that their intent was to create a Christian nation, and that therefore the teachings of Christianity mandated was ultimately what Jefferson meant by self-evident truths. Given the fact that this is Jefferson, that's a hard argument to sell, because Jefferson basically made it quite evident on numerous occasions that he didn't buy into that idea of revealed truth at all. Second, equality. And we can remember, back to the sentence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. What did Jefferson mean by equality? It's important to dwell for a time on what Jefferson meant when he asserted as a self-evident truth that all men are created equal. Surely, given the weight that he placed on common sense, on logic, he didn't expect the world at large, which was, after all, his target audience. This was a Declaration of American Independence. So his audience was the world. He wouldn't have believed for 1 second that all men really were equal. That made no sense. And for Jefferson, what made most sense was what mattered most. It's very clear then that when Jefferson said all men are created equal, he didn't mean that all men were really to be equal. In fact, that is so absurd to most people that when they criticize socialism, communism, or any of these other isms, they always point to that the danger of a strong government and the danger of minimizing or limiting individual freedom is based on the idea of redistributing property and making everybody equal. That's become the bugaboo, the major issue that many people have traditionally used to pan or to dismiss the seriousness of many of the world's isms. Again, what it tells us is Jefferson was not dumb enough or ignorant enough to believe that the world would accept the idea that God made man equal, that everybody was to be equal. I guess what I can say is if we've treated that as absurd, we have to assume also that Jefferson and his colleagues would have as well. So what did he mean, all men are created equal? In the eyes of God? That's what many of us like to believe he must have meant. Problem is, Jefferson's rejection of established religion, of dogma, in favor of reason, seems inconsistent with measuring anything, especially something as important as equality, by its place in God's eyes. To Jefferson, impossible to measure, unverifiable. So obviously, he didn't mean what many of us choose to think he meant, which is all men are equal in the eyes of God. No, what Jefferson seemed to mean by equality related to what he termed man's moral sense, what we call today man's conscience, man's innate sense of right and wrong, good and bad. To Jefferson, what distinguished man from all other living things was his innate inclination to do what's right, to do what's good. This is a quote from Jefferson in a letter to Andrew Carr in 1787. He who made us would have been a pitiful bungler, Jefferson wrote, if he had made the rules of our moral conduct a matter of science. Unquote. Jefferson is saying, he who made us, the Creator, would have been a pitiful bungler if he made morality a matter of science. Jefferson goes on to say that only one man in 1,000 knew science. So what about the rest of them? Back to Jefferson. Man was destined for society. He was endowed with a sense of right and wrong relative to this, since this sense is as much a part of his nature as the sense of hearing, seeing, feeling. It is the true foundation of morality, unquote, says Jefferson. What Jefferson means by equality is man's inbred sense, his conscience, his innate knowledge to know the difference between good and bad, right and wrong, to know and feel and want to do what's best in a particular situation, to do for his neighbors, and to be able to trust that in a pinch they would do for him. That's what equality is, because what Jefferson is arguing is all human beings possess that. Obviously, we deny it. I'm out of context here. I'm off the written page. Obviously, we deny that. Obviously, few of us accept that. Many of us would like to, But most of us believe that it's naive, it's idealistic, it can't happen, not in this world. The people that trust and believe in this world are its victims, not its winners. Many people believe. Fact of the matter is, what Jefferson is saying is that that's really what defines equality. All men have it. So the fact is, if all men have it, where the hell is it? I think that's the question that I think all of us might have. From his writings, from his commitment and his readings of Hume and many of the other so-called Scottish philosophers, his education at William and Mary, the library, the books that he had in his library, which he donated to the Library of Congress. All of these things, it seemed to me, speak to the extent to which Jefferson's belief and faith in man's moral sense was the basis of the equality that he referenced in the Declaration of Independence. Man was destined to be a social animal, a social being, Jefferson believed. So to repeat that line from the letter to Peter Carr, he who made us would have been a pitiful bungler, Jefferson wrote, if he had made the rules of our moral conduct a matter of science. Only one man in 1,000 knew about science, Jefferson argued. What about the rest? No, man was destined for society. He was endowed with a sense of right and wrong merely relative to this. This sense is as much a part of his nature as the sense of hearing, seeing, feeling. It is the true foundation of morality, unquote. Jefferson affirms here what most of us already know. Man's sense of right and wrong is tied directly to his existence in society. The way we measure right and wrong is by the way it affects other people. Man as a social being, how he treats his fellow man, how he acts when no one else is looking. This is the only meaningful measure of man's humanity, Jefferson believed. To quote him, the moral sense, or conscience, is as much a part of a man as his leg or his arm. And like limbs, Jefferson asserted, this moral sense is strengthened by exercise, as may any particular limb of the body, unquote. You have morality, everybody has it, but it can be developed, it can be honed, it can be strengthened by exercise. This next paragraph is one I posted on Facebook earlier, but it's the only paragraph I posted. I probably will try to put the whole document on Facebook later. This is where I think we are at this point in our analysis. Besides confidence that man's morality is innate and can be strengthened, Jefferson takes us here on a more meaningful speculative journey to the very soul of our civilization. Not only does he challenge the scriptural narrative of man's greatest sin and the stain it left on his collective soul, he raises doubts as well about the institutions man created in its wake, the validity of assumptions man has made since then regarding human nature and what society must do to deal with it. Jefferson infers an even more challenging question. Are the accommodations, constitutional and otherwise, society has made to a human nature we presume to know well and addressed accordingly the right ones? Or is human behavior as we know it more the product of than the cause of the institutions we have designed in error? This might just be the most important chicken and egg dilemma ever. Think about it. What we've seen so far in Jefferson's Declaration of Independence in this one sentence pretty well takes on directly the Christian idea of original sin. Adam's sin, and the extent to which all of mankind is stained forever after as a result of that sin. Therefore, man's nature is evil. Man is naturally inclined to be evil. Man is naturally inclined to be self-interested. Man is naturally inclined to manipulate situations to his own advantage. Man can never be trusted to totally be honest and outgoing with his neighbors, with his friends, with his community. Man must always distrust others because they will distrust him. Life is a competitive struggle for success. You are in competition against everybody else. And on and on and on. Thus, capitalism, free enterprise capitalism, is the perfect system because it fits man as man really is. This is what human nature is really all about. Our system is perfect because it matches it to a T. But the question I think this raises, to what extent are people as they are because of the institutions that society raises them in and socializes them into, or, to put it another way, are the institutions we created the result of human nature that we know to be true? Or have the very institutions we created shaped human nature into what we expected it to become? In other words, are our institutions an accurate reflection of man as man really is? Or do our institutions create the man that our system says that everybody is? Madison said in Federalist Number 10, if you'll remember, that factions are sown in the nature of man. The driving force in man's behavior is self-interest. And what Madison said is the system, the structure of government that he created is designed to control the effects of factions. You can't eliminate them. You can't eliminate self-interest because it's sown into the nature of man. What you have to do, Madison said, is control it. All of our institutions, our government, our schools. Think about your experiences in class, in public school, in K through 12 school. The entire system is oriented around the fact that you can't be trusted. You need to be groomed. You need to be told and taught right from wrong. You need to be punished for doing what's right. You need to be rewarded for doing what's wrong. You are put in class in rows because if there isn't a teacher watching, you will cheat. We know this. In other words, all of our institutions have been created pretty much on the idea or the assumption that we know what human nature is. The question that I'm asking is, to what extent are we right? Or to what extent are the institutions we create, we use to socialize young people into our society, to what extent are they responsible for promoting the human behavior that they are created to elicit. It seems to me that is a magic, very important determination and issue. I think that paragraph is incredibly important in understanding Jefferson, because what Jefferson is doing is challenging the Christian origins of original sin, the whole basis of it, man's evil nature. And what we are seeing in Jefferson here is the same optimism, the same positivism, the same idealism that drove Emerson and Hawthorne and Thoreau, that drove the Transcendentalists to believe that there's a bit of the divine in all of us. And if man were really allowed to be free and weren't controlled and shaped by institutions, if man could really be free, the goodness, the spiritual nature of the soul within him would come forth and flourish. In a sense, the man we see is the man we created. We didn't create institutions to deal with the man God created. We created institutions to perpetuate the man we wanted to see. It seems to me that's really a significant issue. So that's the second thing. We dealt with self-evident truths. We dealt with equality. We dealt with the extent to which Jefferson believed that equality was based on the moral sense. But it also suggests, so we've also suggested so far, that what we have done is effectively repress the moral sense. We have taken the moral sense out of Jefferson's entire philosophy of life, when in fact his entire philosophy was built upon it. We have created a historical fraud to the person of Thomas Jefferson in this context. What's third? It seems to me the third issue in this particular sentence of Jefferson's preamble is the whole idea of unalienable rights. So let me read what I've got on that. It stands to reason, no pun intended, given the moral sense Jefferson knows drives mankind, that he would seek a remedy to protect man's natural inclination to do good. If man has in him a moral sense to do good, then it seems very logical that Jefferson would have to come up with some way to protect man's ability for his moral sense to come out. Natural rights, unalienable rights, derive directly from the Creator, rights that no earthly power can compromise or eliminate, seem to fit the bill. But while Jefferson identified life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as examples of unalienable rights, he acknowledged in the sentence above that these were but three among others. Remember, Jefferson said in the sentence in question, they are endowed with certain unalienable rights that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He didn't say that love, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were the only ones. He said among these, the implication is that there are more. Much of the nation's history since 1776 has seen efforts to add to Jefferson's list of unalienable rights. Most suggested additions have proven fruitless, in large part because they fail to coincide with what's already there. It seems to me that if you look at the inalienable rights Jefferson does identify, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then if you're going to add to that list, what you add has to be consistent with those three. But the key is they have to be consistent to the way Jefferson understood and defined those three, not to the way that society has chosen to change the meaning of those as time went on. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as each relates to what Jefferson believed about man's moral sense, is his theme, despite suggestions to the contrary. So naturally, if you're going to add a natural right or an unalienable right, it would have to be consistent with what Jefferson meant by the unalienable rights he does identify. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are what Jefferson identifies, and they are directly related to man's moral sense in Jefferson. That's his theme, despite any suggestions to the contrary. Until Jefferson is taken seriously, his views on man's nature reconsidered, his declaration reevaluated in the context of the complex, inquiring mind that gave birth to it, Jefferson's list of unalienable rights will remain complete and definitive. Until we begin to take seriously what Jefferson meant by unalienable rights, we're not going to successfully be able to add to them. But here's the kicker. What's proven more successful over time, and thereby more troublesome, than failed additions to Jefferson's list of unalienable rights, has been the ongoing campaign to integrate his declaration into a more suitable ideological narrative. In other words, rather than finding additional rights to add to Jefferson, what we've decided to do is take Jefferson and alter him to fit our worldview rather than us trying to fit his. To force fit the document, its preamble especially, into a philosophical statement of national mission, an intended defense of expansion and free enterprise, human nature driven by self-interest, sustained by individual freedom, with minimal restrictions and dependable government support and protection. Thereby, Jefferson's declaration is transformed from a formula that would build community into a rationale for individualism and material accomplishment. I just noticed a typo, and I'm going to mark it while I'm looking at it. So in a sense, if you think about it, what Jefferson meant by unalienable rights, with inclusion of the moral sense and all that went with it, would be a strengthened community, would be a much stronger sense of community amongst everyone. What the changes wrought in Jefferson's declaration have resulted in, however, is that Jefferson's declaration has been transformed from a formula to strengthen community into a rationale for individualism and material accomplishment, success. Those who would rewrite the past to justify the present have appropriated Jefferson's declaration into their own preferred world. In it, Jefferson's equality has been transposed from a moral sense, a desire to treat others with dignity, into a more practical economic scenario where equality not linked to opportunity has little meaning. Translation, we've taken equality and we've decided that what Jefferson must have meant was equality of opportunity, fairness. That fits our way of life. That's what Jefferson must have meant. What I'm suggesting is when Jefferson mentioned equality, he meant equality. There, success in whatever form is reduced to a commodity, to property. There, Jefferson's happiness, what he knew to be the sense of fulfillment that comes from helping others, is redefined as property, and along with it, the liberty to pursue it, mysteriously transposed into an unalienable right under the Declaration's preamble. And that's what we talked about before. The idea that when Jefferson mentioned pursuit of happiness, he most likely really meant property. And by transposing property for pursuit of happiness, what we have effectively done is insert happiness in Jefferson's Declaration as an unalienable right. And that's what many people, corporate lawyers and others, have gone to court to try to argue, that private property is a natural right, is an unalienable right, and that government doesn't have the right to regulate it or to manage it or anything. And what we suggested is, even if you go back to Locke himself, you can find the right to do that. John Locke's natural rights to life, liberty, and property are effectively superimposed from his state of nature onto Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. His preamble, hardly noticed by the Congress charged to debate and approve it, has emerged as the Declaration's premier passage. America's creed, according to Abraham Lincoln. In 1922, Carl Becker's Declaration of Independence affirmed Jefferson's document as totally Lockean, and thus the definitive view of the Declaration of Independence was fixed permanently in the nation's hearts and in its textbooks. And I've concluded with this statement. Imagine, in the Declaration of Independence, all us thought we all knew. It appears the real Thomas Jefferson might be ready to turn everything we thought we knew about upside down, on its head, as it were. Disturbing, for sure. But maybe, just maybe, what he has in mind or in store for us as a replacement will prove an even greater contribution to mankind. And I could almost insert there, parenthetically, what a way to celebrate the 4th of July, if indeed the things that Jefferson merely meant the Declaration of Independence to say, the preamble that he defined as self-evident, the ideas and the thoughts and the philosophy, the commitment to the idea of a moral sense as the basis of human equality. If Jefferson had indeed been able to build a republic on those principles, in which people's priorities would be directed towards community, towards helping others, towards responding to the needs of others, towards the kind of faith that would let you know that when you were in trouble, your neighbors would come to you. If that was the direction that independence was going to take the republic, then it would seem to me that we could celebrate the 4th of July even more than we already do. Now we celebrate it because of Americans' independence. I would suggest to you that if we were honest in our interpretation of Jefferson, if we tried to fulfill the challenge which Jefferson gave us in the Declaration, the challenge which his colleagues gave us when they ratified it without debate, then we would in fact be doing justice to Jefferson that thus far has been denied him. Not only have we denied Jefferson the historical honesty of interpretation that he deserves, but in effect we've denied all of those other people the whole time who ratified this document and thought they knew they were fighting for. The irony of the situation, and I'm off the document here totally, and you know we're approaching the end of our program. We've got about 5 minutes left in our program. But it seems to me, as I think back on the period, on the flow of events that began in 1776 and then moved on into the 1780s, what we saw happen under the Confederate period is a playing out of the fact that many people in America really believe the Declaration that they thought it was written to define. I'm trying to say that accurately, but let me try to be even more honest and more direct with that. Part of the optimism, the idealism, what Madison referred to as naivete, part of the misplaced faith that the founders seem to have in the degree of civic virtue in society. That's what led to disaffection with the Articles of Confederation and ultimately to the desire to alter the Articles of Confederation and to replace it with of the United States. There's no question that in a sense, movement of the Constitution is explained only by many of the nationalists, those most advocating national government, the reduction of states, believed that the founders had had too much faith in people's ability to do good, in the degree of virtue that existed within the population at large. Madison, much of Madison's writings in the 1780s reveals this sense of disappointment and disaffection that he has for the mistaken idealism of 1776. We expected too much from our people. We had too positive a view of human nature. We really didn't distrust or we didn't believe that self-interest had the power over man's behavior that it really does. We have to go back to the chalkboard. We have to go back to the beginning and do this again. But this time, we have to find a way to come up with a system that naivete and idealism and misplaced optimism can't lead us all astray. And thus Madison, Hamilton, Franklin, and the other nationalists set out early in the 1780s on a move toward strengthening the national government, which finally reached success with the calling of the Constitutional Convention at the conclusion of the Annapolis Convention in October of 1786. I guess what the history of the nation after 1776 supports is the validity of the self-evident nature of what Jefferson included in the Declaration of Independence. People believed what that document said. People believed that when Jefferson talked about equality and talked about natural rights and talked about the ability to hold government accountable and to throw out a government that didn't respond to the will of its own citizens. People really believed that they had that right. They believed that that's what Jefferson wrote the Declaration to say. What I'm suggesting here, I've always considered that to be naivete on the part of the masses, gullibility on the part of the masses. In fact, if you think back to the letter that we looked at from the French ambassador right after the closing of the Annapolis Convention, in which he talked about how gullible the people were and how easily maneuvered they were by the elite class, by the upper class, by the wealthy, as it were. I always believed, as he said, that maybe the leaders for the movement for independence had pulled one over on the people, that they had manipulated and maneuvered the people into believing something that the move for independence was that it really wasn't. But I'll be honest with you, now that we've done this intensive reading of the Declaration, and we've kind of milked or drawn out some of the internal meanings of the Declaration, it's beginning to dawn on me that maybe there was a degree of sincerity in Jefferson that I didn't appreciate was there before. I've learned something. I hope we all have. It's 59 minutes after the hour on this 4th of July in the year 2016. It's time that we left. I want to invite all of you back tomorrow. Remember, on Tuesday, our programs begin 1/2 hour later than they did today. So in the East, we'll be beginning at 1:30 p.m. Our program will be 90 minutes instead of the full 120 minutes that we usually have on Mondays and Wednesdays. I want to thank you for tuning in on this, the 4th of July. I hope that you have a wonderful celebration of this evening. I hope that I've contributed something to your day, something to the festive nature of this particular holiday. I do invite you to come back, and I thank you for your continued support of this program and of the Head On Radio Network. Thank you.